Well, good evening, everybody. We've got a lot of activity going on tonight, and people putting up Christmas decorations, and we're getting excited about the Christmas season. If you're looking viewing us by Facebook Live or YouTube Live, we want to welcome you to the Wednesday night Bible study here at New Harmony Baptist Church. And I got a bunch of youth looking at me right now, staring a hole right through me, like I didn't do it. Whatever it is y'all think I did, I didn't do it. All right. Anyway. We're going to continue our study in the book of Isaiah, but before we do so, I do want to make a few announcements. It's basically December. It's not technically December, but it's basically December, and the schedule is going to be a little bit different a little later on in the month. I want to remind everybody that we've got the youth and children telling the Jesus story on December the 17th on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. We're pretty excited about that. And on the 20th, that following Wednesday, we will have our annual candlelight Christmas service, and that'll be on a Wednesday on the 20th, and there won't be any dinner that night. We just show up here. Everybody sits in these two sections right here, and we'll do the Lord's Supper that night, and we're looking forward to that, getting those things together. And then the following Sunday actually is Christmas Eve, and that Christmas Eve falls on a Sunday, so that Sunday morning there won't be Sunday school, but we'll show up here at 10 o'clock a.m. for about a 45-minute service or so, and I'll be doing the children's sermon that morning. I'm looking forward to it, and it's kind of become tradition for me as a pastor to always do that, especially when it's on Christmas or right around Christmas, and so we're excited about that. And I will add this too, as of Deacons meeting, and we made this announcement this past Sunday. The following week is actually New Year's Eve, okay? And because it's New Year's Eve, it's been suggested that we do the same thing that we do on Christmas Eve, that we just have a 10 o'clock service that morning, because a lot of people are traveling, and we'll do that. But the difference is that night, for anybody who wants to show up at the 6 o'clock hour, we will do our prayer service that night at the 6 o'clock hour. And but on Christmas Eve, we will not have a prayer meeting. Myself and my wife got to go out of town, and we got youngins to go see and a grandbaby to go love on. She can't wait to get that grandbaby down here, and I keep saying, wait till he walks. And she said, what's walking got to do with it? I said, I don't know, it just sounds good. Maybe he'll start walking at 8 months, and then I'm going to have to eat my words, so that's just a couple of months from now. He's already 7 months old, y'all, and that's hard to believe. Anyway, are there any other announcements before I take prayer concerns tonight? Any other announcements that I'm ladies, WMU. Oh, I will say this. We are still, for December, we are still taking up donations and book bags and backpacks and all that stuff. We're trying to get 24 of those ready for Cherokee Elementary School sometime in January. So, hey, we're still doing that. And thank you all for what y'all helped the WMU do. And the ones that we took 40 up there. I think we did 20, and then Second Baptist did 20. So we thanks for that. No other announcements. Okay. Does anybody, if you're watching, you have a prayer concern tonight, just write that in the comment section. You can do that on YouTube, or you can do that right here on Facebook in the comment section. Just write your prayer concern in there. Is there anybody tonight got any prayer concerns? Yes, ma'am. Hal Holston. Hal Huddleston. Kyle Huddleston. You got gum in your mouth. I'm sorry. She can beat me later for that one. Yes, sir. Jimmy House. Okay. His family. We'll keep you in prayer, brother. We'll pray. We'll pray for you, brother. Y'all pray for Max. Vicky has graced us with her presence once again, which reminds me to please pray for her mama and her dad. And is there anybody else got a prayer concern over here? How about over here? Do y'all have any prayer concerns over here? Stephanie's surgery next Wednesday. But it's been approved. You're on. You're still up in it. Okay. All right. Pray for her. Anybody else? Unspoken? Do we have any other unspokens tonight? All right. All right. Well, let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, we thank you so much for tonight. We thank you for this time together. Lord, thank you for this time of year. Thank you, Lord, for the birth of your son, Jesus, who's made all the difference. And Father, thank you for everybody who's able to be here tonight. Pray for those watching by Facebook Live or YouTube Live. And I want to pray for those that are out decorating right now. Thank you for our young people and our children. Lord, as you be with them in their ministry times tonight. Thank you for those who help get the meal together for tonight. And Lord, just pray for all these that we've listed and spoken of tonight. Pray for these unspokens. And Lord, once again, as we enter and journey into your word tonight, I pray that you give us understanding and teach us in the power of your Holy Spirit. And again, Lord, we're excited about this season and the time of celebration. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I'm probably going to be a little rough trying to jump back into Isaiah because we've had revival. I did a Thanksgiving thing, and then, of course, we missed the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So it's going on about a month since we've touched Isaiah. But we're going to start in Isaiah 19 is where we're going to go. I don't know how far we'll get. My goal is to get through 21 because chapter 20 is really short. But we'll see how far we get. We're definitely in this time when God is proclaiming judgment on different nations. And if you remember back in our first part of our journey, we looked at one. One gave us I'm just kind of going back and reminding y'all. Chapter 1 gave us kind of what the rest of the whole prophecy was about. And tonight we've been talking about these 2 or 3 countries that the judgment's coming into. And now we finally have caught up with them in that part of the prophecy. So anyway, that's where we'll be tonight. The proclamation that we find here is against the nation of Egypt. And Egypt, bless you, Egypt should come to our minds because what happened in Egypt to God's people? What had happened once before? They were enslaved in Egypt, okay? And we're going to hit that kind of hard here towards going back to that time of the Exodus. And I want to read the first 4 verses, and then we're going to go back and make some comments about them. And then we jump around a lot. Even though I will read through, we're going to jump around a lot as far as questions and things like that. So just be ready. It says this, the burden, and he used that statement in the last one too. The other nations would say, the burden against Egypt. Behold, the Lord rides on a swift cloud. When I read that, what comes to y'all's mind? Behold, the Lord rides in on a swift cloud. That song, what's it? Behold, he comes. The days of Elijah. What else does it remind you of? The second coming. Yeah, that's what I thought too, Brother Doug. And it says he's going to ride on a swift cloud. But there is one more connection I made, and it may be kind of but it's the word cloud. Let me give you some instance. The word cloud and Egypt. What comes to mind? Cloud and Egypt. What did God do when they... Thank you. That was another thing that come up to my mind. It says, and I will come into Egypt. And he says, the idols of Egypt will totter at his presence. And the heart of Egypt will melt in its midst. He said, I will set Egyptian against Egyptian. And everyone will fight against his brother. Sounds like civil war, doesn't it? That's exactly what it is. And everyone against his neighbor. City against city, kingdom against kingdom. The spirit of Egypt will fall in its midst, and I will destroy their counsel, and they will consult the idols and the charmers, the mediums, and the sorcerers. Where have we heard that before? They're not the only ones that did that were caught up in it, the truth sayers and all of that. All right? If you remember that back in Babylon. All right? When we were in the book of Daniel. All right? Number 4, and the Egyptians will give into the hand of a cruel master, and a fierce king will rule over them, says the Lord of hosts. This is a good stopping place. So, the question is, who is this against? What nation are we talking about again tonight? Egypt. We see this statement, the Lord rides in on a swift cloud, and he will come to Egypt. All right? Now, at this time, Egypt is one of the most greatest powers of all time. All right? This was before Rome and all of that. All right? And now this power, this ancient world, they've been in power for all this time. The land of the pharaohs, okay? And it's just south of Israel. And it was an empire. It was an enemy of Israel for a while, but it was always Israel had to be reckoned with them. Many times Egypt had been the enemy of Israel, okay? And sometimes Egypt had been a refuge for Israel. And sometimes, watch this, Egypt offered a tempting but ungodly alliance with Israel. Now, that's significant because that's kind of been going on even in the day of Isaiah with the northern kingdom. Remember how they were trying to take sides so they could get protection, but then that person ends up taking over in Judah? So we see it now in Egypt as well. So God is basically, in this particular chapter, bringing a prophecy against Egypt. In Isaiah's day, there is no other more powerful nation on earth at that time. What they did, they were given into superstition a lot. They worshiped everything. And I didn't really realize it, but, you know, they had a god that an ape was part of it, a cat was part of it, frogs were part of it, crocodiles, lizards, and they used a lot of things, and they had a lot of different gods, okay? So that reminds me when we think of cats and lizards, and what was the other thing? Frogs. So does that start to ring a bell with people? Let's go back in time a little bit. Let's go back and let us look, just for a brief moment, let us look at the exile and what took place. Moses said, let my people go. But Pharaoh didn't let his people go until when? What happened in the meantime when he actually let them go? What took place? The plagues. Y'all remember the one about the frogs and the locusts? Well, I had never found this list before, probably read it and forgot all about it. And let's think about what took place in Egypt. It was such an evil place. It had enslaved the Israelites. So when the plagues came, there's a list, and I'll try to do my best because I can't pronounce all these gods' names, okay? Number one, the Lord knocked down the god of Canaan. He was the guardian of the Nile. The Nile ran through. That's why they were there. It was very fertile, okay? And the god of Hapai, he was the spirit of the Nile. So there was a guardian of the Nile and the spirit of the Nile, and the guy, Osiris, who had the Nile as his bloodstream. What happened to the Nile during that? No, it didn't dry up. It got red. It became a bloodstream, and the waters were turned to blood. So this land, keep in mind, because this is a fertile land, all right? Even though this had happened in the past, we're reminded. What other god did God knock down? The goddess of Heq. It's Heqt. Qt. You tell me how to pronounce that. That was the frog goddess, okay? The frog goddess of fertility, all right? And then there was the plagues of frogs, right? The Lord knocked down the goddess of Hathor. It was a cow-like mother goddess. And so there was a plague that killed off the livestock. Y'all remember this? All right? The Lord knocked down the god of Imhotep. I-M-H-M-Hot-E-P. So anyway, he was the god of medicine. And then what happened? They had the plagues and the bulls came up. So y'all see something here? Everything they held dear, God sent a plague against that particular small G-O-D God. And then this next God, it looks like the word nut because it's N-U-T, but I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. All right, the Lord knocked down the god of Nut or Nut. That was the sky goddess. And so, remember, he sent a plague of hail, and it destroyed things. God knocked down basically the whole system of Egypt. They worshiped their gods. He even sent in lice and locusts, okay? Can you imagine I can't imagine locusts, but can you imagine lice coming in like that? Woo! Yeah. Then there was the one that you all have heard of. Lord knocked down, wait a minute, there's one more. The Lord knocked down the god of Seth, and it was thought to be the protector of the crops. So the locusts came in, they destroyed the crops. The Lord knocked down, this is one we've heard of before, the god of Ra. If you ever watch Ghostbusters, the god of Ra is actually mentioned in, I might have seen it one time to know that, right? No. The god of Ra, thought to be the sun god, okay? The sun god. What's the Hawaiians call him? Pelea? She was the fire goddess over there. You know, everybody has their own. So there was a plague of darkness. So that was dealt with. Osiris, we've already mentioned, was also the Egyptian god thought to be the giver of life and the supposed deity of the actual Pharaoh that was in charge when Moses was there. And of course, what famous plague would that come against? That's it, man. He's on it tonight. The firstborn child was taken. That was part of the plagues. And then and only then do we see Pharaoh say, okay, but God, his heart hardened. And I say that because I was watching some channel or some YouTube thing, and they were up there in that part of the Red Sea where they think possibly Moses crossed, and they see crustaceans down there, and one of them looks like a chariot wheel that's missing, but an axle. And I don't know why they don't go break it apart and just see, but you know, there's kind of neat when you see evidence of that because the waters came in, right? No, when they crossed the sea and the waters came in, all the parts of the chariots and stuff like that. So yeah. But anyway, so we see it. God went in, he took care of the idols right off the bat. You'd think they'd learned their lesson, but they're about to learn their lesson again. But there's a promise for Egypt that we find here. Okay? And so we see it. So how again, according to verse 1, is God depicted? What does it say in verse 1? He's coming in on a swift cloud. He sure is. And guess what? He's coming again. I'll just say that while I'm here. And according to verse 2 and 4, what do we see that's going to happen? What kind of forms of judgment are going to come against them? If you go back to 2 and 4, what do we see there? So basically like I said, civil war. And then also, when we get to 4, what's going to happen? So a foreign entity is going to come in and take over. That's part of the judgment. And that's kind of what's been happening with all these. Yeah, there's going to be war, there's going to be judgment, and somebody's going to come in and enslave you or kill you and lay spoil to the land. And, of course, Egypt, you know, like I said, in this part of Egypt was all around the Nile. It was. So definitely Egypt is definitely, and I ain't going to go too far with this, but I'm going to make a statement. Egypt was definitely under the judgment of God. Hang with that thought for a second. Is it possible that God still brings judgment on nations today? Is it possible, you know where I'm going with this, is it possible, and this is what I feel in my heart, if the United States doesn't turn back to God, and that means the Christians that are in the United States, turn back to God and remember who God is it possible that possibly judgments already begin to happen? Okay. I'm just wondering. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking you questions. Okay? So we see that. And we also see, he says that they're going to turn to their counselors, and guess what? That's not going to be no good. They can't explain what's going on. All right? So a lot of times, what one guy said, he said, when a nation is under the judgment of God, he often seems to remove sound counsel and wisdom from their leaders. You remember back when they said they were going to have little kids leading them, and they were going to just pick a leader based on the fact that he had a coat and nobody else did? That kind of applies sometimes. You look around, it's like, where did they get this cat at? Like, hello. Can't hold a conversation, right? And so sometimes God allows that. And as he said, the idols and the charmers, they were going to try to turn. Egypt was also renowned, according to the book of Kings, chapter 4, 1 Kings 4:30. They were known for having wise men, but even the wise men were not going to be so wise, and they couldn't figure out. So they're going to be given into the hand of a cruel master. So God is going to judge them in 2 ways. First, like I said, he's taking out their leadership. He's going to destroy the council. Second, he's going to be giving them over to some cruel, oppressive rulers. Okay? This is the curse and the judgment that God brings. Now, we're going to read a bunch of verses real quick, and then I'm going to stop at verse 18 and make a comment, okay? But I want us to take note what this looks like. Verse 5. The waters will fail from the sea, and the river will be wasted and dried up. So, I don't know if it's talking about the Nile River, but you think about the Nile River when you think of Egypt. The rivers will were turned foul. I bet it was foul when it was turned to blood back all those years ago, too. It says the brooks of offense will be emptied and dry up. The reeds and the rushes will wither. Well, why will the reeds and rushes wither? Because what? There's no water. So you get the picture? It's a desert to begin with. You take out the water, and everything that once was fertile is going to be laid wasted. Okay? Now, I don't know, because I do know this. What do y'all know about Egypt? Like ancient Egypt. Anybody ever? Huh? A little bit? You know, one time or another, it was a lush whatever, and we know that. It's a dry place, but there's still aquifers deep, deep, deep under all that Saharan desert area up there, way deep. There are still oases that reminds us of what it once looked like. I don't know what it looked like. I'd have to go back and look and go by a timetable. But once upon a time, I've always said, man, if you ever was looking for the Garden of Eden, if you look like where Israel and the Tigris, Euphrates, and all that in Egypt, it's got to be in there somewhere. And the destruction, the goods are still there. It's just changed. All right? So, anyway, that's always. But I was even going to say I don't know how they got there, but there are places in the desert, in the Saharan desert, in the Egypt desert, that you go there and you will see, it's not crocodiles, caiman, I think is what they're called. They're little versions of that, caimans. That are living out in the middle of the desert, but they can only live right there. And we know they came from somewhere. Now, they could have been brought there, but it just kind of gives us a thought. But all this is going to be laid to ruins. That's going to dry up. And, of course, it has dried up, right? When we look at it today. So we see that, all right? The rivers are foul. The brooks are dried up. The reeds, they withered. The papyrus reeds by the river, by the mouth of the river, and everything sown by the river will wither, be driven away, and be no more. And this next one should not be a surprise to you. It says that the fishermen also will mourn. Well, why is the fisherman going to mourn? No water, no fish. That's right. And all those will lament who cast hooks into the river, and they will languish who spread nets on the waters. Moreover, those who work in fine flax and those who weave fine fabric will be ashamed, and its foundation will be broken. Isn't that funny? The gods got took care of back in. It's like God saying, you think they're gods? I'm the one and only true wise God. He's already shown that. I often wondered in Egyptian history what got passed down from that particular Pharaoh. The fact that they were still living the way they were with all those gods. Evidently, lessons had not been learned. But isn't it funny? What do we know, especially after part of the sermon I preached on when I did my synopsis, what do we know about foundation? If the foundation is no good, you're in trouble. And their foundation was based on a lot of false deities, wasn't it? Listen, if we're not careful, even the children of God, if we don't remember who God is, our foundation can begin to crumble if we're not careful. So definitely in a society, but I know I've said this before, let me say it this way. How does a society fall apart? How does a society's foundation fall apart? Is it just come over the whole society and it happens in one day? No, it happens one person at a time. I give up on God, I walk away. Doug looks at me and says, maybe he's right. He does the same thing. You get 4, 5, 10 people in a church that walk away from the faith. That has a huge impact. And this community, not just this church, if 10, 20 people walk away from God and just, whatever. Say, He is your foundation. And let me tell you what I know. We know this from the Old Testament. We know this from our own lives. Isn't God constantly tearing us down and building us back up? How do you know that He really is the foundation of your life? You won't know until you go down, I can tell you that. You won't know. I got people I know right now that they're like Job. They've been sick. Things have happened. Their fault, maybe not, I don't know. And they do like Job's wife, curse God and die. I mean, they just get angrier and angrier and angrier, and they go out that way. And I'm talking about soul-winning people. You don't know what your foundation really is until you're faced with adversity. I know we can say that in many other ways, but that's the great lesson of all of Isaiah to all of these nations, and even to his own people. that he would allow them to come in. But remember, there's still hope. It's not like, yeah, there's going to be some destruction. Yeah, there's going to be some smelly places. And yeah, there's going to be a stench. You know that sin does leave a stench in your life, right? So anyway, let's go back to Egypt. So pretty much its foundation is broken. It says, all who make wages will be troubled of so, because they ain't got no way to make money. They ain't got no way to live. It says, surely the princes of Zoan are fools. So here we're going to start about the royalty and the wise men. Pharaoh's wise counselors give foolish counsel. Because they're going to try to explain it any other way than there is a one true God, right? And that this has, you know, a lot of people say, well, rush out there and do your worship, make your sacrifices. But that's not to the one true God. How do you say to Pharaoh, I'm the son of a wise and the son of an ancient kings? Where are they? Where are your wise men? Question mark. Let them tell you now and let them know what the Lord of hosts has purposed against Egypt. He's saying, Isaiah, tell them. Tell them what's coming. Tell them how it's going to go down. Tell them what's about to happen to their nature. So the princes of Zoan have become fools. The princes of Noph are deceived. They have also deluded Egypt, and those who are of the mainstay of its tribes. So the people they've always been able to count on, the people, the main families that's been in power, wisdom, and royalty, it's coming to nothing. It's coming to nothing. Verse 14. The Lord has mangled and, is that one? Mingled a perverse spirit in her midst. Now, he's referring to Egypt as a her here. And they have caused Egypt to err in all her work. The reason by the way, in case you're like, I had a hyphen and the one word was up here and down there. I was trying to put them together real quick. Sorry about that. Okay. What is it? When she says err, it looks like a drunken man. This is bad, I know. A drunken man who staggers in his own vomit. That's what it's going to look like. Neither will there be any work for the Egypt, which we already know because it already said that, which the head of the tail, a palm branch or bulrush may do. Okay? I'm going to get to 18 here in a minute. It says, in that day Egypt will be like a woman, as we see all the time before. We've heard this many times in Scripture. Will be afraid and feared because of the waving of the hand of the Lord of hosts, in which he waves over it. All right? I thought it's coming later, but it talks about birth pains. Okay, I thought that's what this was going back to. It says, and the land of Judah will be a terror to Egypt. Okay, let's stop right there for a second. That's totally opposite from the past, isn't it? The land of Judah will be a terror to Egypt. Now, God sent them out. Some people had to, they did all, even in the Exodus, it didn't go smoothly. And they were out there for years, right? And so they're out there for years, and some of them paid the price to the point that nobody in certain generations could ever see the promised land. And even that, it wasn't easy, but it was a process, but God did what he did. I often wondered, and now to think about this, think about us today. What would have happened if Egypt had come out of there and they were obedient to God? How much smoother things may have been. There is a testament and a lesson here for us all. Let's go back and backtrack a little bit. So Judah's going to basically come in, and God's going to allow it to happen, all right? So it's like we would say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth kind of situation. That's what we would say. But I often think about, what is it when we're in captivity and bondage and sin has a dark stronghold on us? Why is it so hard to come out of that? See, they were used to the bondage because they were famous for, at least in Egypt we had, or at least in Egypt. I saw a funny thing one time, and Moses was at a complaint like desk and come by, and he would get mad and say, if one more person said in Egypt, I'm going to pitch a fit here. But that's what happened. And Moses got so angry with him, eventually he didn't get to go to the promised land. And this is this great man of God that God used, and he didn't get to see the promised land. And all these people wonder, and I often think, why is it so hard? And so the challenge today is, if we look back then, and we look back to Christ, and we know he's coming again, Why is it still so hard? Possibly. Yeah. What is that called when people are kidnapped and held for years, and all of a sudden they'll take up for the person that, there's a terminology for it. Maybe some of that's at play, I don't know. But the point is, there is a way out of sin. There is a way out of darkness, but it takes a lot of faith. And let me tell you, it's scary. You want to grow in your walk with God, but you're scared to take that first step? Hey man, I get it. Where would this church be if it didn't take a step into the darkness and trust God? Because you know what? I'm not saying you do that every day of your life, but there will come a time as a child of God or as a church or as a married couple or as a family, you will have to both face like, I can't see, but God is telling me that this is the way we need to go. It's hard, isn't it? I'm just trying to be real for a moment. So unless we give these people a hard time, it was scary. They'd been taught, but they've been there for a long time. I understand that. But I'll go back to what I said. What would it have been like if they'd just been obedient? What would it be like if we would just be obedient to the things God's telling us to do? Okay, I'll get off that. Verse 17 says, "And the land of Judah will be a terror of Egypt. Everyone who makes mention of it will be afraid of in himself, because the counsel of the Lord of hosts, which he has determined against them." Isn't that funny? He used the word counsel because the counselors can't be trusted. And now this counsel of the Lord of hosts is coming. And now this message is being delivered by a prophet. Well, I got a feeling they know about prophets because they are all given over to truthsayers and all that. But the story of Moses, who was the great prophet, and what happened to Pharaoh. Now, we're going to read this and talk about verse 18. "In that day, 5 cities in the land of Egypt will speak the language of Canaan and swear by the Lord of hosts. One will be called the city of destruction." Now, if we go back, let me go back to where I was at. Where did I go? If we go back to, hold on a second. Verse 18, the prophecy is looking at the day, get this, that Egypt, and I didn't say all of Egypt, but there's going to be a lot of Egyptians. Guess what? They're going to worship the Lord. It says with the altar of the Lord, and it will memorialize God's great works with a pillar to the Lord in verse 18. Let me go back for that. Or did I have the right? Anyway, they're going to speak the same. They're going to be in the land. They're going to speak the language of Canaan. So they're going to do that. So that means that they're going to be converted. That means that they're going to, because of what they've seen, that the day is coming, get this, not just God's people, there's a hint. One guy put it that way. There's a hint that guess what? It's going to go outside of God's people into other nations. I mean, this all points to a gospel being carried throughout all the world. Because we know that's all authored and foundation by Christ Jesus. So Egypt's going to be brought under its own oppression. They're going to cry out to God. Okay? And so there we go. The next section goes from, we'll go into like verse 25 and we'll talk about it. But there's a lot to take in here, I know. And I don't know how far we'll get in here, but we'll go as fast as we can. But think about it. So they're going to speak the same language of Canaan and swear by the Lord of hosts. It doesn't say Lord, it says Lord. It means our God, the Lord of hosts. And one day it's going to be called the city of destruction. In that day, verse 19, there will be an altar. There's the altar part I talked about. To the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord and its border. There again, the pillar, I know it's talking about, but we think about the cloud and pillar and all of that and what God used. It, to me, just kind of all flows. It's like even during the Exodus, God was giving them example of what's coming in the future, if you look at it that way. Okay? And the pillar of the Lord at its border. So why is that significant that there's a pillar at the border? When I come into Alabama, coming down I-65, I think they took it out now. Anybody ever been that way? You're going towards Birmingham. You're coming out south from Nashville. You hit that line. What's the first thing you see? It's a welcome sign, but there's something huge there. A big rocket ship. Does y'all remember that now? If something's standing at the border, like when we cross it, it's like, ooh, look at the rocket ship. Well, that means space travel and freedom to go check out the moon or whatever comes to mind. When somebody hits the border of Egypt and they see a pillar to the Lord, what is that going to? Hey, we're about the Lord, the one true God. At least in this city, we're not talking about Ra and all those other gods of the frogs and fertility and all that stuff. This place has been redeemed. This place has been changed. Yeah, there might be a city in there and it refers to destruction because God brought judgment. But from that, this is what we learned. So that monument is at the border for a reason. Okay? And it will be for a sign, for a witness. This is verse 20. To the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. For they will cry to the Lord because of the oppressors. Okay? And if they cry to the Lord, do you think the Lord's going to hear them? Yes. He will hear them. He says, and he's going to send them a Savior, a mighty one, and he will deliver them. Isn't it interesting that Jesus died for the whole world? Isn't it also interesting, think about this, the same place that once held slaves of God's people, if you go back to the Christmas story, we're not told a lot about it, but we know that Joseph and Mary took the baby and they had to go another way. And many scholars believe it was Egypt that they went to. Now, I'm just saying figuratively, Jesus literally crossed into the border of whatever. But it's just, when you think about the parallels and the different little things, and then at some point they had come back, probably when he was about, I think 2.5 maybe, if my memory calling. That's what they say. Because we're not given a lot about Jesus' childhood. We go from the time he was born to maybe the time in Egypt, which is probably the time, believe it or not, that's when the wise men came, when he was about that age. Okay, it didn't happen on Christmas night. Okay, and it never said 3 wise men. We only went by the gifts and thought there was 3 wise men. There could have been more than that. I don't know. So we get that. The next time we see Jesus, how old is he? Anybody remember? He's 12. Yeah, and his parents leave him, and what happened? He got lost in his father's house, and they had to go back and get him and scolded him. And then the next week, we know he's about 30 years old, so there's a lot of jump there. Either way, Jesus is the answer to all that this is going. There's coming a time that even as that, think about that. Even your enemies have the possibility of being made right with God if they will cry out to him. There it is. All right? He says, and they will make sacrifice and offerings. Yes, they will make a vow to the Lord and perform it. And let me go back and look. Okay, keep going. We're going to read a few more verses. And the Lord will strike Egypt. He will strike and heal it. Isn't that something? He will strike it and heal it. They will return to the Lord. And he will be entreated by them and heal them. And in that day, there will be, listen to this. This is cool. This is the answer to the next question, by the way. In that day, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria. And the Assyrian will come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Syria. And the Egyptians will serve with the Assyrians. And in that day, Israel will be one of 3 with Egypt. Hello. So he's talking about all this destruction. Now he's talking about the healing part of it. In that day, Israel will be one of the 3 with Egypt and Assyria, and a blessing in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, blessed is Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. So, how is the future blessing of these 3 nations? And what are the 3 nations again? Israel. And what's going to happen? And there's going to be a what? An highway. Isn't that funny? So you got to go from one place to the other place to get to the other place. So all the trade, all the belief system, all the work of God, all the camaraderie, that's way different than what the past looks like, doesn't it? And there again, as one guy said, if there ever was a reason to say that Jesus and God intended to love the world and love people outside of his chosen people, here's another reason. And it's right here in the middle of the Old Testament. So blessed. It's going to be an amazing work of redemption that takes place here. So there's going to be peace in Israel and peace with these particular nations. And we see it. And we see it. Well, Let's go over to chapter 20. It's a short one. That may be all we have time for. We'll go as long as we need to. But just know this. God kept his promise then. He's going to keep his promise now. There's going to be trade and travel with these three particular ones. Now, there's going to be another nation that's added into this. Not just Egypt, but also Ethiopia. And it says this, and we'll talk about this guy, and we'll talk about some of it. Okay? In verse 1, chapter 20. In the year that Tartain, he came to Ashdod, when the Sargon, the king of Assyria, sent him, he said he fought against Ashdod and he took it. This ain't the first time we've read about him, by the way. And at the same time, the Lord spoke by Isaiah, the son of Amoz, saying, look what he says to do. And you tell me what comes to your mind. Go and remove your sackcloth from your body and take your sandals off your feet. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. Now, I want to stop and tell you, it does say naked and barefoot, but it's not really like buck naked, okay? It's not completely nude, okay? And then the Lord said, just as my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and wonder against Egypt and Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians as prisoners. So I know it jumps ahead, but it begins to talk about it. So another ruler. So who is that ruler that's going to be cruel to Egypt again? Who do we see? It's going to be Assyria. And what three kingdoms did he say we're going to finally come together and have camaraderie? Assyria, Egypt. You see? So it kind of gives us a little bit and it goes back. So Assyria is actually going to lead the Egyptians away as prisoners. And the Ethiopians are going to be as captives. Ethiopia is just to the south of that, okay? Young and old, naked and barefoot, with their buttocks uncovered, and the shame of Egypt. Okay, so let's go back and look at this. Okay? Let's go back and look at it. There's going to be a time when the Assyrian army is going to conquer in the Philistine city of Ashdod. Okay? And what was Isaiah's response? What was it? What did he tell Isaiah to do in verse 2? Okay. So we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but let's get a little history behind. Many believe that this actually took place in a real time in history about the year 711 BC. So history says, hey, this really happened. Okay? The Philistines were also neighbors and thorns to Israel, and the fall of Ashdod would certainly make Judah think, what's next? We probably need some protection here. All this time, Judah's going to get it. Okay? Judah's going to get it. So he said, walking barefoot and naked for 3 years. So, sometimes God would also ask the prophet to do something along with the word he gave him. So, more of a visible sign, right? It's basically to use to awaken people's minds about all of that. Okay? And so he began to walk naked and barefoot. Theologian Wolf says it this way. He says, we shouldn't think of Isaiah was nude. I told you we'd get to that. Completely without clothing. Instead, he would only wear the inner garment, okay, in that day. Sort of like us wearing a nightshirt or undergarments or whatever, but that would be exposed, all right? So the message wasn't really about nudity. It was about humility. So this is getting ready to happen. And, why would anybody put sackcloth on? What was that for? No, sackcloth. Mourning. So he went from mourning to continue to teach. Okay? Y'all remember when old Jonah went in? Isn't it funny? The people in Nineveh, they ended up wearing sackcloths and then they put ashes on. And so it was a very common thing in a time of so there's humility being shown here. So we see it. We see it. So he wasn't all the way naked. All right? And then Wolf goes on to say, one need not to imagine is that Isaiah walked around stripped for the entire 3 years, or that but he goes to this. He says, remember Ezekiel? Does anybody remember this? I didn't remember this. And I got to go back and look this up. Ezekiel laid on his side for 390 days without getting up. That was over in Ezekiel 4. So perhaps part of each day was used for those designated purposes, Wolf says. All right, we're going to read the rest of it. Let's read the rest of it. Verse 5. When they do all this, then what? They shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, their expectation, and Egypt, their glory. And the inhabitants of the territory will say in that day, surely such is our expectation. Wherever we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape? Seems like it's going to be a hopeless situation, even though we know that there's hope. But in that day, we're not going to see hope. Does anybody ever come across somebody, you talk to them, and it's like they got no hope? Anybody come across somebody that dark? It's like no matter how much you try to pour light into it, they have been walking in darkness and dreary, and you just can't break through. Isn't that so frustrating? You know, it's a very frustrating thing, isn't it? But can I remind us tonight before we go on that we have all the hope in the world, even when it's dark. Let me just take you back a little bit. This really happened here in our church, and it only happened a few months ago. Do y'all remember on August the 6th, the night that thing went down? What was happening at our church that night? We had a blind girl, a very young blind girl come in here who used to be able to see. You remember her talking about that process of darkness and relearning? She had to probably still today, she has to overcome darkness literally and trust God and trust others around her. And so I just thought I'd bring that up. Remember that. Now we're going to switch. There is a name coming, and then we'll close out here in a minute because I can't finish this up. There's a name of another nation coming. It's the fall of Babylon. Been there before, talked about Babylon before. This is in the time of Daniel when it's coming. Remember, in Daniel it happened. Here, it hasn't happened. All right? And there's this weird thing. So against whom does Isaiah first prophesy in chapter 21? Who is it? It says the burden against the wilderness of the sea. That's kind of a unique thing, but it's Babylon. And it was often called that because of the plain and the land. There was many, many bodies of water that connected it. And so a lot of times they would look at it and refer to that as a sea, where a lot of water was at. They often refer to that. The wilderness of the sea is another name for Babylon. Write that down in case you have never heard that before. Because of that great plain, like I said. The title of the sea might as well have been given to the waters of Babylon because the great plenty and multitude of them. The name of the sea being given by the Hebrews to every great collection of water. They often refer to that. Okay? Now there's two things that happen here. As the whirlwinds in the south pass, so south of there, so it comes from the desert, from a terrible land, coming in from both sides. A distressing vision is declared to me. The treacherous dealer deals treacherously, and the plunder plunders. Go up, O Elam. Besiege, O Media. All its sighing I have made to cease. Therefore my loins are filled with pain. There it is. The pangs have taken hold of me like the pangs of what? A woman in labor. I told you we'd get there eventually. So when we look at verse 2 and 3, what two nations do we see there? Does anybody know what Elam refers back to? What nation that refers back to? Persia. I bet y'all can get this. What about Media? Medes. All right? So that means that these two nations would be used to judge this nation. From the south and from, where did it say, the desert from the, y'all help me here, the desert from the terrible land. So they're going to get hit. So basically, if you want to know where that's at today, Persian Empire, controlled by the Babylonian Empire, modern-day Iran, somewhere in there, okay? So Trapp says this. He says this about this whole ordeal here. God often makes use of one tyrant to punish another tyrant, okay? As here he stirs up the Persians to go plunder and waste the Babylonians, so that the Persians were afterwards in like sort of a punishment by the Macedonians. And the Macedonians, they got punished by who? The Romans. And the Romans, those Romans, got punished by the Huns. Y'all see where we're going with this? And the Huns, the Vandals, the Lombards, the Saracens, the Turks, and all who Christ is going to come and destroy all. By the way, many people often refer to this world as a modern-day Babylon. The industrial complex of it all, the business of it all, the false gods of it all, the false religions of it all. It was often referred back to Babylon. Why is that important? And I'm going to end early tonight because I'm going to say it like this. Because it happened before, it's going to happen again. I wish I could tell you, and I hope that it does. I say, my hope is it's going to get better. It's going to get better. We're going to see better days. We're going to see more people. God's going to do some. God is going to do all that. But God does what he does in his own timing. But if we really are at a certain point in history that God only knows, it's not going to get better. I hate to be the bearer of that. With God, it will be better because our full trust can be in him. I mean, the same God that he rules over the nations, he steers nations, his sovereignty is over all, like I said Sunday. But if we are living out of days, I wish I could tell you, but it's going to get darker. It's going to get more evil. And nobody likes to hear that stuff. But I want to tell you something. It's okay because he's sovereign. He's in control. He knows what he's doing better than what we know. So ask God, here's the challenge, to give you another set of eyes. I mean, I'm living in a time. Watch. Let me just tell you how I think for a second before we close out. Doug, when you were my age, say 10 years ago, you thought about retirement a little bit, didn't you? I'd say just a little, right? Did you ever find yourself going in your portfolio looking about how much money you might have in there for the future? I'm scared to look because of the way the economies went. I don't have a pension. You know, say, Philip, you're talking about money. I know. I'm here today to tell you I ain't going to say it's going to be easy. If this stuff that really happens in my life, this stuff that Satan tries to bring up into fear, I just got this peace that says it's going to be all right. God's got it, and if I got to eat canned beans and make my wife love them to survive, that's what we'll do. If I've got to work till I cannot work no more, if I've got to use my hands to do something, that's what I'm going to do. He's still God. It doesn't change. I'm saying bad times could be coming. And I think my wife will believe me. I hope she don't run off from me. You know, that's a good thing. You know, but God's still been, can I tell you something? If it does, God's still been good to me. And if I'm alive, even in the midst of that, he's still not done with me. Do you ever think about stuff like that? Or am I just whacked out in my brain? You say, yeah, and you're also whacked out in your brain. I know what y'all thinking. But it's the kind of world that we live in today. People my age don't have pensions to count upon. If you're self-employed, which is interesting, you got to go find it. My dad's still living on that pension. And my dad and her dad, they'll say to me, son, don't stop working. Keep paying that Social Security in. I'm glad you're all having it. I hope it's there one day for me. But you know what? My hope is not in any of that. That's what I'm trying to tell you. God will take you to a point till you have nothing to do, either cursing or you're going to rely on him. That's the big lesson I see in all of these triumphant feats that take place here in the book of Isaiah. Anyway, I hope I didn't go too far off, but that's the kind of things that it makes me think about. It's good to have you all tonight. It's good to have you all join in by video. Brother David, would you close us out tonight, please, brother?